Welcome to the mysterious Book Emporium. Last time the rebel army had been crushed at West Hill thanks to Catriel's betrayal and Merrick's weakness for elven women. But in spite of it all, Catriel is trying to right her wrongs by showing the prince the only way to save his throne, by crossing the deep roads. Will they make it? Why don't you take a seat as we continue on with Part 4 of The Stolen Throne, chapters 13 through 16. Chapter 13. We open up this chapter to Merrick, Loghain, Rowan, and Catriel finding the door to the deep roads. The doors are surprisingly open, so off they go, starting their adventure into the deep. Having no sense of time down below, they walk until they are tired, although none really sleep that first night, fearing the ultimate silence around them and what it could hold. For 2 days they travel. Eventually they find themselves at a crossroads. Catriel is able to find markings pointing to Gweren, meaning that it seems they are in the right direction. About a day later, they stumble across a thaig. Although filled with cobwebs, they could feel flowing air from above. While passing through the thaig, Catriel stumbles across a large statue, which she assumes to be a smithing paragon. As she stares up in awe at the history before her, a large spider falls from above and tries to lift her up to be eaten. Merrick is able to catch her legs, but he too is soon lifted up in the air. Loghain is then able to catch them both, yanking them down hard. This triggers the spiders to attack. In the battle that ensues, Catriel is bitten by a spider, its venom causing her to pass out. As the spiders begin to overwhelm them, Loghain sets the cobwebs ablaze, causing the entire thaig to catch fire. Scrambling for shelter from the heat and smoke, they spot a golden dome building and rush towards it. Rowan goes to help Merrick carry Catriel, but soon she too passes out from the smoke of the flames. Loghain then picks up Rowan, but just before they reach the entrance, Merrick passes out as well. And then Merrick wakes up. With Rowan's hand making sure he doesn't sit up too quickly, she gives him water and he begins to cough up debris from the smoke. She informs him that Catriel is stable thanks to healing herbs she had left over in her bag, but she hasn't woken up yet. We learn that Loghain had managed to drag all 3 of his group members inside of the dome building before passing out himself, saving all 4 of them. Nearby, they also hear the sound of water. A magic vase that supposedly creates fresh water had tipped over down below, creating a creek in the building. Together, Rowan and Loghain confront Merrick about Catriel, and that he shouldn't trust this strange elven woman, even going so far as to suggest that perhaps they should leave her behind in the deep. Merrick is upset, but Rowan then confronts him about his love affair with Catriel. Guilty, Merrick is unable to say much. We also learn here that Loghain didn't know about the love affair. Rowan then asks Merrick one thing. Did the two continue to see each other after that first night? To which he said that they did. Angry, Loghain asks if he loves Catriel, and after a pause, Merrick says yes. Seeing Rowan hurt, he tells her that he will end things with Catriel, but she declines, saying that all she really wanted was just for him to be honest with her, so that she could let him go. And with that, she picks up her armor and says she's going to go wash up. Loghain calls Merrick an idiot before following after Rowan. Alone by a small fire they built, Merrick hears a soft voice from Catriel, that his friends are right. She had heard the entire conversation. She begs Merrick to stop defending her, that they should break things off, but he only replies that he loves her. How can you say such a thing to someone you have known such a short time? He reached up and gently took her chin in his hand, turning her head back into the light. Tears were streaming down her cheeks. "Oh, I know you," he whispered. "I may not know what you've done or where you've been, but I see who you are. I know that you're a good person and worthy of love." He reached up with his thumb and wiped away a tear on her cheek. "How is it that you don't know that?" Catriel then begins to tell him who she really is, but he cuts her off. He knows that whatever she is about to say is painful for her and tells her he knows everything that he needs to, and whoever she was before, he knows he loves who she is now. But he asks if she loves him too. She nodded, letting the tears finally come with a sad, bitter laugh. "More than I should. You'll be the death of me, my prince. I swear it." We cut to Rowan washing her armor off in the magical creek. Washing away the grime from her armor, she hears the gentle steps of Loghain nearby and calls out to him. He appears next to her and sits down. Rowan talks to Loghain that she just wants to hate Merrick, but she can't. The two share a moment. Rowan spelling out all of her insecurities, how she misses her father, how useless she feels at times, and Logate comforts her, telling her how wonderful she is and that Merrick is just a fool for not seeing her. And with that, he goes to leave, but Rowan catches him on the arm. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't mean stay." He didn't move. "I'm not him," he finally muttered, bitterness in his voice. She took his hand and brought it slowly up to her face. His fingers cradled her cheek gently, fearfully, almost as if he expected she would vanish into a dream. Then he rushed forward, snatching her up in his arms and kissing her with an urgency that almost overwhelmed her. After they part from the kiss, Rowan tells him that she realizes now that she doesn't want Merrick. She's been a fool, and the chapter ends with Loghain gently laying her down in the dark. Chapter 14. Catriel wakes up with Merrick curled around her. Rowan and Loghain eventually come back from the creek, and they all begin to pack up to move, saying very little about the night before. Opening the door to the dome building, they quickly make their way out of the ruined Tig. Eventually, they get to the very edge of it, with a large metal door that looks as if it had been burst open by something that was trying to get in, an echo from the darkspawn that killed the Tig long ago. Catriel tries again to look for signs pointing to Gweren, but after hours is unable to find anything. So they head out hoping they are going in the right direction. As they go off into the tunnels, the walls begin to become coated with some sort of purple fungus, some of it even slightly glowing. They also find spider husks, some of them half-eaten, all signs of recent darkspawn activity. Then they hear a rasping sound in the dark, but it quickly fades. Further in, Merrick finds the skeleton of a dwarf, his arm covered in rubble. The body is unusually undisturbed, so he begins to uncover the arm, and he finds a glowing blue sword. Curious, Merrick touches the blade to the fungus on the wall, and the blight retreats from it. It seems the blade repels the blight. And then, not long after that, the group begins to hear something. The deep humming was coming from it. The creature was moaning softly, almost chanting, and this moan built upon the sounds of many others behind it in the shadows. They hummed in unison, a hushed and deadly whisper. The creature spoke as one. Looking down the tunnels, Catriel sees the first darkspawn. Backing up a bit, they realize that the spawn has somehow come from behind them as well. They are surrounded. Rowan cries to Merrick that perhaps his sword can save them, but when he swings it towards the darkspawn, it flinches, but still goes to attack. When a spawn is hit with it, its skin melts away near the wound. It repels, but not purifies. They are fought back into a corner when suddenly a horn sounds out that silences the darkspawn. A group of dwarves has arrived, and they help defeat them. From the skulls painted on their faces, Catriel recognizes them to be the Legion of the Dead. After the battle, both the Legion and our group are naturally surprised to find each other in the deep roads. The leader of the Legion offers to take the group with them, and while Loghain at first is hesitant, Merrick points out that they have no idea where they are, and the Legion might be able to help them. The leader tells them that his name is Nalthar, and tells them that they need to keep up with the Legion's pace. Chapter 15. As our heroes and the Legion of the Dead walk through the deep roads, the Legion has picked up the fallen from the battle with the Darkspawn. While walking, the Legion begin to sing a hymn in the Dwarven language that Catriel assumes to be about loss. And here, walking in silence as the Legion sings, Catriel sees Merrick and the others looking somber, some even crying. All have lost loved ones in this war, and no one really gets time to mourn them. Here in the deep, our heroes take a moment to reflect on all that they have lost. Eventually, they reach the Legion's camp. Everything is extremely organized. Nalthar then makes a speech to the rest of the Legion. "We have survived one more night, my brothers and sisters," he shouted. "One more night to deliver vengeance on the spawn that stole our lands. One more night to spill their blood and hear their cries of terror." The dwarves thrust up their weapons as one and roared in approval. "It has been 112 nights since our deaths," he shouted, and they roared again. "And tonight, 5 more of us have found peace." The shouting died, to be replaced by a somber silence as the rout bodies were delivered forth, passed overhead from dwarf to dwarf until the 5 lay before Nalthar on the floor. "Rest well, my friends. For 112 nights you lasted. Now it is time for you to return to the stone in the sight of the first paragon." Nalthar takes the 4 to be fed and eventually brings him to his quarters, which seem to double as a storage room. He then looks at Merrick's sword, telling him that it is dwarven, but he should be the one to keep it, as someone who was able to make it through the Ortonteig deserves to keep something as magical and great as the sword. Here, Merrick tells Nathar what they have come to the Deep Roads for, to reach Gweren to lead his men in battle before the Orlesians destroy them all. Nathar tells them that they were actually headed the wrong way, but it won't take that long to get there now, and that he not only knows the way, but is happy to show them. It isn't often that the Legion gets to do actually something other than kill Darkspawn, so why not? Merrick then gets an idea and asks that perhaps they would be willing to fight Orlesians. Nathar is unsure, nervous about fighting under the sky, and that perhaps he could fall into it, but more importantly than that, there is honor in fighting Darkspawn, but there is none to be had with killing Topsiders. Then Catriel steps in, saying that if they were to win the battle with the Orlesians, Merrick should be king, and the king of Ferelden often visits the king of Orzammar. Merrick could put in a good word for the Legion and their families back home. And then this interests Nathar, who agrees to fight after a promise from Merrick that anyone who dies on the surface will not be buried in dirt, but in the stone. Under 2 hours after that, off the Legion goes to Gweren. During their journey, Catriel notices that many of them actually stare at her, finding that she's the first elf most of them have actually seen. Loghain then approaches Catriel and thanks her for her help. The two talk for a bit about Merrick, both agreeing that Merrick is not ready to be king yet, and that he is way too trusting. Whatever is going to harden him for being king is going to hurt him, which seems to bother both Loghain and Catriel. Less than a day after when they left, the group reaches Gweren, or at least the dwarven outpost under it. Eventually they find their way to the opening of the surface, but it has been eaten away by time. Nathar sends his people to work on the lock, eventually having to burn the lock with acid. And then the doors swing open, to reveal a giant stone golem and many human men to storm in and attack the Legion. Merrick and Loghain cry out for them to halt, and that they are not being attacked. But eventually Wilhelm comes from the rear, surprised to see Merrick, and he tries to catch his magic spell to make sure it's really him. When at work, soldiers begin to cheer with tears in their eyes, and that they had believed him dead along with Arl Rendorn. They tell Merrick that they had thought their entrance was an attack, but most importantly, their legions haven't come yet, and the army has made it back to Gweren in time. They made it. Merrick has actually made it. Chapter 16. Back in Denerim, Severin is shaken by what he reads on a recent message. King Megren's temper has gotten worse to the point he almost beat a serving boy to death because he served him sour milk. Severin considers not even telling the king, but realizes that he would just find out eventually, so why not now? He finds Megren donned in armor and getting fitted for a new, expensive set. Mother Bronarch is also there, smiling when she sees Severin walk into the room. It seems that she knows the news, and she has come to watch the outcome. Seeing Severin looking anxious, the servants rush out of the room to avoid King Megren's anger. The smiths working on the armor stop, wondering if they should leave as well, but this actually angers Megren, who ends up accidentally kicking the nose of one of them, blooding his face, and then the both flee the scene anyway. Megren asks what Severin has come to tell, and he answers. While they have taken Gweren, it's not known if they will be able to hold it. But, most importantly, Merrick is alive. This shocks both the mother and the king, and Megren draws his sword and demands to know how he was able to survive. Severin protests that they never had a body, and Megren was the one who insisted that he had died despite not having one. It's unknown to them how Merrick is alive and also in Gweren, but the rumor is that he has risen from the dead. Severin goes on to say that after driving out the rebels from the town, the locals begin to riot as well, which in turn is making it difficult for the Orlesian forces, and it's said that the riot has killed the commander. But perhaps worst of all, word has gotten out. Redcliffe has sent word that a riot has started there as well, and they're asking the crown for help. Megren is outraged that they would call for help when they should be helping him, calling for everyone to be hanged. Mother Bronarch suggests that perhaps being merciful would be the better option, to which Megren's anger then gets turned on her. Backing her up into a wall, he demands that he will do no such thing, and that she will be spreading doctrine that he has come back from the dead because he is a demon. Megren then turns to Severin, telling him that he has one last chance, and that a new army is on the way from the Emperor. But it's the last they will receive, As Severin leaves, he thinks to himself that it's the king's last chance as well, because Severin has been doing all of his work behind the scenes. Without him, the country will fall to the rebels. At that time, he is approached by a serving boy who informs him that a woman is waiting in his room. That woman is named Catriel. Before opening the door to his room, he casts a shield of protection on himself, knowing that she's dangerous. When he opens it, Catriel looks tired and has obviously just arrived, showing that she has arrived in a hurry. Severin then asks if she is still with the rebels, to which she replies that she is. Catriel then corrects his information. The rebels have won Guerin back, and it wasn't easy for her to escape back to Denram. As they talk, Severin begins to notice a small buzzing sensation on the back of his head. But Catriel informs him that after his assassination attempt on her, their contract is now forfeit, and she will not harm Merrick. Severin begins to threaten her, but slowly the buzzing sensation is getting worse until he collapses completely. Catriel informs him that she had put a contact poison on the knob, and although she will not kill him because her bardic honor will not allow it, she has come to tell him she is no longer a servant of anyone, and that after seeing the rebels, if he is to continue, he will be killed. And then she leaves, leaving a paralyzed Severin on his floor, thinking of all the ways he will make the rebels pay. Discussion. We have a bunch of artists this week, so let's just go in alphabetical order. A huge thank you to Alisa L, at Margra Art, and at Tina Fire Angel. Now to the actual discussion. Early in Chapter 13, it talks about how the opening of the Deep Road seemed to have been filled with rocks in an effort to seal it up. My question is this. Was it the dwarves sealing it up to protect themselves, or the humans above to keep out the Darkspawn? And if it was the doors, what were they protecting themselves from? Because I feel like that just keeps the Darkspawn in when they want them to go out. I skipped over it a bit in the summary section, but at one point the group finds what looks to be an outpost in the deep, covered in old bones. Yosht had this to say on it. When the party arrives at the Dwarven way station where they enter the Deep Road, they find some bones, which are hard to place race-wise. But the exact phrasing used was, most of the bones were barely distinguishable as belonging to humans or Dwarvens or even elves. This might mean that the corpses of all these races were there, or it's just a somewhat awkward way of phrasing that they couldn't tell which race the bones belonged to and I'm overthinking it. But if they did die there, and if it was in a battle, why would humans and elves come down to fight the Darkspawn? They didn't generally do that. Honestly, when I first read this comment, my first thought was like, oh, the non-Dwarven bones are just Grey Wardens. Although, thinking about it some more, the roads were long lost before the Wardens were founded, so I don't think it's Grey Warden bones. So perhaps, as the outpost was very close to the surface, there were surfacers who worked in the area for trade? Really, I don't really have an idea, but it's an interesting thought. Another thing about the deep roads, Catriel explains that the ancient dwarves used ingenious air ducts to keep air flowing to the deep, which explains how our heroes can breathe clean air in the deep roads. But how do these work? Have these ducts really never collapsed or have become clogged? Could this be an actual mechanic in a later game where you have to conserve air? Yash also mentions this. When Catriel mentioned dwarven air ducts, it got me thinking, how did the ancient dwarves make anything on the surface, since they didn't want to go up there? Nowadays they have large surface dwarf communities, but unless I'm mistaken, there are no records of surface dwarf communities before they lost the deep roads in the First Blight, which is when those ducts would have been built along with the deep roads entrances. There likely were surface doors, but it seems doubtful that proper dwarves would want to contact them, since they do so now only because they need to, which wasn't the case back then. Honestly, I think this is a bigger question than it lets on initially. Perhaps they didn't leave the underground, they just tunneled up. Perhaps they traded for some help on the surface or whatnot. But to build a supply of air, something so necessary for life, implies to me that they weren't native to the area, and that perhaps the early Dwarven settlements were on the surface, and then they went down to the deep for some reason. There's also some hints that perhaps this might have happened, and that the elves were the one to push them down. We'll kind of get to that a little bit later. But the fact that they need air to live down there, then they had to build a way to get the air, means that they weren't there originally. If they had come from the deep originally, then they wouldn't need air ducts, you know? That's just my thought on it. Another Dwarven construction question. Catriel mentions that the deep roads use lava as a heating and lighting source, which we do see on a lot of deep roads maps in game. My question then is, why did the lava in the novel seem to go out when they don't in the games? That's supposed to be like their feature. Are these ruins somehow older than the others? in fact, just in general, how does it stay lit? Isn't lava much too hot to use for that kind of thing? Wouldn't it melt away at the roads eventually? What if someone fell in? I just have a lot of concerns with this method of lighting. Like, you can use it in like Minecraft, that kind of looks cool because you don't actually have any effects for it. But in real life, I feel like there's a lot of problems. Is maybe like Thetis lava different? Is there some sort of magic enchantment on it? Like, there's a lot of questions about this. Anyway, when Catriel finds the markings to Gwyrin, she translates the name from its original Dwarven name. Gwa, meaning salt, and Ren, meaning pool. Now, with that in mind, it would mean that Ren from the Descent DLC is named Pool in Dwarven. In Chapter 14, we get 2 lines from both Merrick and Catriel that I want you to take note of. One is Merrick talking about dragons being in the deep roads, and the other from Catriel saying that the Veil is sit in the deep and that a skeleton could be possessed. Remember this. Lock it deep into your brain and keep it there when we get to the calling. Just keep it there. Remember this. I also want to talk about Merrick's new magic sword for a bit. 1, you can actually get this item in Dragon Age Origins, and 2, Catriel recognizes the material as dragonbone because of the hue. Except in Dragon Age Inquisition, dragonbone is usually this green-orange tint instead of the blue we see in the novel. Now granted, Ice Dragonbone is this purple tint, so perhaps different dragons have different bone tints, so on and so forth, but it's interesting to think about. And then we also have a comment about this from Makovar. I find it curious that a dragonbone blade is described as repelling the creatures of the Blight. This might be taken, or in my opinion retconned, as the work of enchantments on that particular blade, but alternately, the dragonbone innately repels the Blight. If so, the dragon's resistance to the Blight might be more significant than just them being big and resilient organisms. How that connects to the ideas of archdemons taking the form of dragons for a reason and the significance of dragons in general, however, I have no idea. To throw my thoughts in the wind, I don't think it's retcon to say it's enchantments. Like, reading just the novel, I honestly thought it was the enchantments because the damn thing glows and has runes on it. Like, look at this sword. How is this not covered in enchantments? Come on, man. But anyway, I do think this is an interesting idea that maybe it's the bone itself that repels the Blight. Granted, they do describe that the resistance is more biological than magical, but perhaps it's a mix of both. This is Thetis, we don't know. Now, when the gang gets attacked by Darkspawn, it talks about how they hum a sort of chant while they attack. And with that in mind, I was recently playing Dragon Age Origins, I want you to listen to the Battle of Ostagar again. While it might just be background music and it's not exactly a hum, that whispering sound might be the only example of this strange Darkspawn feature that we have. Now, granted, a lot of things in this game have been retconned. Maybe they don't make the hum anymore. Maybe the hum turned into this whispering sound. Maybe they just forgot about the hum. I don't know. Anything is possible at this point. But I was just playing it recently and I thought, oh, maybe this could be that. But anyway, Makovar also says, it also made me think about how musical the Dragon Age universe is in the lore. A lot of fundamental elements of the world are centered around songs. Delirium sings, the Titans sing, the Archdemons sing, the Chant of Light is basically a song. I wish this aspect of the world was delved into more deeply in the games themselves. Which is completely true. Dragon Age has a lot of connection to music, and I wonder if one day that fact will come into play, and maybe one day one of the games is centered around this idea, because we deserve it at this point. There's been so many theories about why everything revolves around song. I don't really have any good answers or really any good theories at this point. When the group meets the Legion of the Dead, it talks about how they have skulls painted on their faces. This sort of surprised me, not that they have skulls on their faces, because we've seen that, but that it's actually paint. I was always under the assumption that it's an actual tattoo. Also, speaking of Nalthar, you can find his armor in the Descent DLC. When the group meets with the Legion of the Dead, all of Nalthar's dialogue is written in, of all things, a very obvious Irish accent. This is curious as pretty much all the dwarves in the game have American accents, and as Nathar would have been from Orzammar, he should have one as well. I think this just speaks to the idea of early Dragon Age origins. With dwarves having an Irish accent, it's very stereotypical of fantasy settings, so I can see the thought process of why this happened in this novel, but I do wonder why they changed it. It could have just been as easy as it's hard to get good Irish accents in the middle of Canada, and they didn't have the budget for it, but once upon a time, they were going to make the dwarves with Irish accents rather than the American ones. We also learned that the Tig with all the spiders is Orton Tig, which we actually visit in Dragon Age Origins. Now, this won't be our first time with Orton in the novel, so remember how it is now. Half-burnt, filled with spiders, and a beautiful golden dome building that kept fresh water. After the Legion agrees to fight the Legion, Merrick is said to have to explain that the sun doesn't come crashing down to the surface and cause things to be set on fire, which seems to be a common belief among the dwarves. I mark this as interesting, as there is an elven legend that talks about how the dwarves fear Elganon, who is connected to the sun, because of his fire. Perhaps these two ideas are connected, and that long, long ago, what seems to be the sun did fall on the dwarves. Perhaps this is a superstition from a time before everything we know. Or it's nothing, I don't know. When Loghain and Catriel talk, they say that Merrick essentially needs to be hardened before being king. I bring this up because this is just an actual game mechanic with Alistair in Dragon Age Origins. Now, there's a lot to be said on this, but I will talk about it more in the next episode. I just want to point out in this chapter here, it does actually use the word harden, so just fun facts. Patho Gen 7 says, is it ever stated definitively how long it takes to travel throughout the major locations in Ferelden? I ask because in Chapter 16, when Nathar is leading Merrick and company to Orton Tig to Gwaren, it says that the travel takes less than a day. I could be mistaken, but that seems like an awfully short time frame. The only time I can recall exact time frames given is when Dagna talks to Wynne in Dragon Age Origins. She said that it takes approximately 2 to 3 weeks to travel from Orzammar to the Circle. Given that the distance from Orton Tig, which I assume is near Orzammar since we visit in Origins, to Gwaren is much longer than the distance from Orzammar to the Circle, I would think it would take more than a day. And honestly, this is a wonderful question. We could spend some time here and talk about the location of Orton Tig and trying to line it up with the Deep Roads maps and that perhaps Orton Tig is deeper into Ferelden than we thought. But all in all, it's all going to come out to the same conclusion. Nothing makes sense. You might be able to reason that if Thetis is a small enough planet and perhaps the Deep Roads are so deep that the journey to Orton de Gwaren could take half a day or less than a day or whenever it was, but then you would have to climb up and that would take a lot longer time than described. There's just no good answers in this. Like, the only reasonable explanation is that Orton Tig is really, really far away from Orzammar, and that the Warden just had to travel all that way back there. Now, when they finally reach the Dwarven outposts under Gwaren, they see large pipes from the ground up to the top of the cavern. When Merrick asks what this is, Nathar replies that humans wouldn't understand. What this is, I have no idea. It's never been brought up again, anywhere else that I know of at least. Perhaps these are the air ducts, but then we didn't see the pipes in Orton Tig, or really any other Tig ever. Perhaps there's something to do with the water from the nearby ocean. We have no idea what this is. I feel like he just wanted to put pipes up in there, and then they just didn't explain it, because fuck it, but whatever. And now, at the end, as Allie the randomizer put it, the love square has come to fruition. Let us update the square. First, Merrick admits that he loves Catriel to everyone, which angers Loghain, although Loghain is still devoted to him. Catriel admits that she loves Merrick. Rowan had allowed herself to no longer have feelings for Merrick, and that she does care for Loghain, while Loghain has cared for Rowan this entire time, and now gets to act on those feelings. We also have Rowan being very upset with Merrick for what he did, but she doesn't really hate him for it, and that both her and Loghain don't trust Catriel, but accept that some part of her is trying to help them for the moment. And with that, thank you to everyone who submitted entries, and I look forward to what everyone comes up with next time for our final episode on the Stolen Throne. If you have any comments as a whole about the novel, artwork, characters, or anything else, please send it in. Our next section will consist of chapters 17 to the end of the novel, and please send me your comments, artwork, videos, literally anything, by May 20th, 2018. Either comment below, send me an email at gilderthon@gmail.com, tweet Gilderthon on Twitter, or PM user Gillanon on Reddit. Dres Sheral.